Welcome to the Cool Fireman Podcast, a virtual firehouse kitchen table with Matt, Adam, Brian, Doug, and Freddie, where they discuss everything that matters in today's fire service. Now let's get to the show.
Can I just say giggity?
Hey, but that's a perfect way to start the podcast. Why don't you lead us in there, Douglas?
Giggity.
Giggity, giggity, goo.
Quagmire.
I'm being serious, Doug. Go.
Oh. You like open the show?
Oh.
Yeah.
Just go.
What are we? This is 95 or 96? This is 96.
That doesn't matter.
Oh, okay.
Episode 93, season 9.
No. All right. Welcome back to the Cool Fireman Podcast.
Yeah, Matt's got it.
Oh, golly. Today we've got a special guest. We haven't had much time to talk to him, but over the next hour or so, we should have plenty of time and to get into his subject matter expertise on some electric vehicle, everything electric vehicle. It's Rick, is it Grassel?
Grassel, but close enough. I'll answer that either.
Grassel. Damn it. Chief, just if you want to introduce yourself real quick, kind of where you worked or however much you want to say or not say, it's all good. But yeah, who you are, where you're from.
Sure. Yeah. Battalion Chief with Chesterfield Fire and EMS, Rick Grassel. I've been with Chesterfield. This will be going on my 22nd year, I believe. I started with almost 3 years in Roanoke before I switched to Chesterfield, and I've been a BC for between 6 and 7 years now, something like that.
Okay, cool. Well, welcome to the podcast. The way that we kind of start our podcast typically, I wouldn't say every time, is we do a little bit of housekeeping. Does anybody have any? We didn't talk about this. Does anybody have anything pressing to talk about for housekeeping?
Hey, so I do.
Okay.
South Atlantic Fire Rescue Expo registration dropped today. And as we've kind of hinted around to before, Matt and I are going to be teaching the class that we taught in Leland, North Carolina at the expo. So we pitched it to them. We got a speaking gig, like a big regional mid-Atlantic conference. There's probably close to 10,000 attendees at this event. And we're going to be teaching, I think it's on Friday. Matt and I will be teaching. And so you'll want to come see us. Unkie's going to be there as well. We're trying to convince Doug, he's a maybe sometimes. But Unkie's going to be there as well. He may be able to help us out in the class as well. But Matt and I are definitely on the hook for the class. And so go check them out. Just search South Atlantic Fire Rescue Expo, Raleigh, NC. It's in August. And go ahead and get registered because we'd love to see you in the class. Do
it or don't do it. We don't care. But we want to see you there. We're going to be there. It's going to be Friday night. It's going to be like if you were watching UFC, we're going to be the main event. All right, so let's have some fun. This podcast is brought to you by Unkie Seasoning, unkieseasoning.com. The man in the center top of your screen there just had Salty Fireman come out. I just put it on as a base layer, Unkie, for my tri-tip, and then I put the buttery rosemary on top of that, and it was absolutely phenomenal. So I appreciate everything that you do for the taste buds, if you will.
Golden.
And also Burn Box. Thank you, Burn Box. Send us a Burn Box every month to inspect, and it's always greatness. So thank you, Tom, at the Burn Box. Anyways, let's get into it. I'm excited to hear about some electric vehicle crap. So the only thing that I have to add, or we can start with, is it's not crap. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it like that. I saw all of you kind of like, oh shit, we're going this way, huh?
You're being salty.
I didn't mean it that way. I just meant some stuff. Let's get into it. It's interesting because it's kind of new to us. We've heard a lot of ethyl methyl bad stuff about EV fires and EV accidents. And to be honest, when they first came out, my first thought was like, well, what happens if we have to cut into one of them? Like, what the hell? I don't want to cut a high power line and zap the shit out of myself. And then, now my kids are fatherless. That's terrible. So that's the first thing I thought. And then everybody kind of brought in this whole, hey, what if they catch on fire? They don't go out and it needs like tens of thousands of gallons of water to put them out. So it's kind of like, whoa, now that kind of changes your tactics and all that. So Chief, I know there's a heck of a lot that kind of goes into it. But whether you like to start with, the kind of cutting into or the fire aspect of it, I don't know where you kind of start when you talk about electric vehicles.
Okay, well, I'll you kind of led off really well how I got into this. I kind of stepped in it not purposely. 5 or 6 years ago, I was reading a fire engineering magazine, and it had an outline of a EV fire in California, and it outlined how they took 25,000 gallons of water, and they had to go back to the salvage yard 3 different times to keep putting it out. And I was just like, holy crap. And then left and started my day, and I stopped at, I don't know if y'all have them down your way, but a Wawa is one of our gas stations around the Richmond area. And I was coming out with my lunch, and I looked across the parking lot. There's 6 Teslas sitting there plugged up, charging. And I went, if that was on fire right now, what would I do? And I didn't have a good answer,
Right.
And so I started visiting fire stations, in my battalion, and started asking people, anytime a BC comes up and goes, all right, guys, what would you do with this? Everybody's like, this is a trick right here. I know it. But, started asking guys, I had answers, everything from let it burn to, get a tanker truck of water or sand to dump on it, or get a tractor trailer and put it in the back of it, or find a pool to dump, answers were all over the board. So I was like, we got a problem. If I'm not the only one that doesn't know what to do with this, I know we got a problem. So of course I went to my boss with it, one of the assistant chiefs, and pitched it. And I was like, I know where this is going, that it's going to be like, all right, you found your project, Rick. And it took off from there. And and going through the deputy chief, he's like, well, obviously we need to do an in-service on it. So research it, and we need to teach an in-service. I figured out really quickly that, like, you can't go to one of your firefighting manuals and learn about it. That it's not in the books. We tried to learn in-house and we couldn't. So I had to go back to him and go, look, boss, I want to spend about $20,000 and pay for an expert to come in here to teach our training staff on how to do it. And luckily they didn't balk at all. They're like, we need to learn about this. The threat is here. And so we did. And we hired the Energy Security Agency with Dalen Zartman, I think is his name. They came in and did a phenomenal class and taught us a ton. And we've been trying to continue to learn. And what we figured out really quickly is we don't have an electric vehicle problem. We have a battery problem in the fire service. That's our problem in the fire service, is the batteries, the chemistry of them, and all the hazards that are associated with them. So I'm not sure where else to go with it here. What's your questions about how to deal with the fire side, how to deal with the extrication side, or just the batteries, how they work in general?
Yeah.
All
Go ahead,
the
Chief.
above. I think just start with what this guy came in and talked to you. You guys probably had a set down, and what did you learn from that? Like, what did he say? Look, man, this is your primary hazard, and this is what you need to be focusing on, and how to control it.
Yeah, we actually had about a 3-hour Zoom meeting call with him and his team, and we hung up with that and went, holy crap. We don't know what we don't know. He went really deep into the chemistry with it, and about the anodes and the cathodes and the membrane in the middle of it, and pretty much described all this stuff. And we were like, all right, we gotta bring this down to fireman size. If we go in there and try and teach a chemistry class, this ain't gonna work. So we boiled down to what can cause that. We'll start with the fire side. What can cause the hazards with them. Either they can be overcharged, which will make them go into y'all probably heard of the thermal runaway. That's when the battery self-ignites and it produces its own oxygen and it has its own fuel. Depending on how much charge the battery has, it can burn it 2,000 degrees for a prolonged period of time as each one of the cells continue to fire off, because it enhances itself and it continues to grow and grow and grow until it burns up all of the fuel. So we had to teach firemen about, all right, there's physical damage that can, if it physically damages the battery, it can mess up that anode cathode stuff, and firemen are like, we don't care. So physical damage can make it catch on fire. Yes. All right. If you overcharge it, it can catch on fire. They're like, all right, cool. If it gets submerged in water, it can corrode the batteries. It can catch on fire. So you start teaching the firemen all these ways, and they're like, all right, so there's lots of ways it can catch on fire. What do we do if it actually catches on fire? Honestly, Rick's opinion, by researching this for the last 5 years, the best thing that we can do is let it burn. If that's the best case scenario is for the environment, because the amount of stuff that comes out of these things and the gases that come out of them, the hydrogen cyanide, hydrogen fluoride, the heavy metals that come out of them, if you're flowing water into them, they're all terrible for the environment. So best case scenario is we can let it burn. Well, guess what? That's not what firemen do. right? That we're not geared to do that, and nor is that always going to be an option. They were also good enough to me to let me pull together a group of about I think it was 6 or 7 other firemen and officers on the shifts for us to be able to come up with a game plan of how are we going to address this. So we came up with a quick action guide, and the guys on this group, they were dead set on that. They wanted to try to fire attack, and we wanted to search the vehicle because we got to make sure nobody's inside the vehicle, right? That's basic fireman stuff. So we want to initiate a fire attack. We want to search the vehicle if nobody's in it, and now we're going to try to put it out. And how do you put it out? So if it's just a normal interior compartment fire, that's no different than a normal vehicle fire. It's just the seats and all of that stuff. Once the battery pack actually gets involved is when you have a whole new ball game, because it self-propagates. You have to be able to put enough water in it. There's lots of stuff being sold out there on the market about different extinguishers and all this stuff that claim that they'll put out lithium battery fires. Everything I've read and everything I've learned, it shows that water is the biggest thing that is going to be able to possibly put these things out. And it's going to take a lot of it. And you're going to have to continue to cool that battery pack for literally potential hours to be able to reduce the temperature to where each one of those cells, because every time one of the cell burns, like one of the small cells, there was one article that I read from UL that think about one of those battery cells is not much bigger than a AA battery. When it overheats, it can release up to 6 liters of hydrogen gas. One of those small cells, and there's thousands of them inside of this battery pack, like tens of thousands of them. So if the first one lights off, and it starts producing heat, guess what? It starts boiling all the batteries next to it. Then they light off. Think about if you dropped a cigarette into a box of fireworks. There you go. So you have to put enough water on this thing to be able to cool the battery pack so that it stops self-propagating onto those additional cells. Well, guess what? Those battery packs are designed with a heat shield and with steel to be able to protect them from physical damage. So how do you get water into that battery pack to be able to actually cool it? So, so essentially that you're going to have to wait for it to burn through part of that steel to be able to get water injected into that battery pack. And that's how one of the devices out there being sold came along that you put underneath the car and it actually punctures into the bottom of the batteries pack. And I know some people invested like $30,000 or $40,000 into it. Well, guess what? If you read the directions provided by the manufacturers, they go, do not ever put a hole into the battery pack. Bad things happen. You're like, okay.
It voids the warranty.
You go, okay, cool. So we're probably not going to go that route. The manufacturer explicitly says don't do that. So, and y'all have probably seen some of the articles about there that showed you need to lift half of this one side of the vehicle. That's because most of them on a true EV, the entire underside of the vehicle is the battery pack. And it weighs way more than a standard vehicle fire or standard vehicle, which we'll get into more with the extrication side in a few minutes. But so essentially, you got to figure out a way to lift up one side of it and continuously cool the battery pack on the bottom of it. Now, you don't have to continuously flow like hundreds of gallons on it. Once you have the fire knocked down, you need to have a smaller hose stream to be able to cool that battery pack until the battery pack using your thermal imaging camera gets below 200 degrees. And then you can shut the water off and you sit there and watch it for an hour. If it heats back up, guess what? It's going to light back off again. So, but let me put a hook in, y'all. I meant to do this a little while ago. I want to share something with y'all. And this will give you an idea about how dramatically that these can burn. Okay. And this is a worst case scenario, but let me try this, make sure this thing will work. All right. Share screen. All right, can y'all see that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right, I want you to pay attention. This is real-time video, and I want you to pay attention to how quickly this goes from small to big fire.
Is this... Wow.
That's insane.
Keep watching.
Can you mute the music?
It looks like a scene from a Marvel's movie. The Doctor.
Holy cow.
So Rick,
Wow.
I got a question.
That was
and
a
before we get
34-second clip.
before we get too far, I got a question.
Wait,
Yeah.
Hey, Brian, we just have to explain what that video was real quick because not everybody watches the. So if you were on Spotify or Apple, I'm sorry, if you were on Spotify or YouTube, you saw what just happened. But Rick just showed us basically it was a bus, a city bus that was probably powered by a battery, and the top of it exploded. Obviously, it got overcharged or it got overheated or it was a faulty battery, and within 30 seconds burst into flames, catching like an entire strip mall. Looked like what was possibly on fire. So that's what it was. In about 30 seconds, that's what happened. That was crazy.
And if anybody wants to look it up, just go on YouTube and look up Paris electric bus fire, and you'll find it.
Perfect.
So what was your question?
So my mind's going 100 million different ways, right? Like my fire marshal world. All other folks know I'm just coming off as president of the Fire Marshals Association, and we just had a meeting last week. And one of the things that they talked about was how North Carolina is trying to lead the way in being the factory location to produce the batteries for the most of the EV cars, right? So we'll put a pin in that because that's a totally different risk. And they're doing that because of the interstate travel and commerce, right? We got I-40 that goes all the way to California. We got 95 that runs up and down the coast. So it is a central point to get those batteries up and down the road in its bulk form, right? Tractor trailers on rail cars by bulk, right? To all these manufacturers. But for the right now, for the company officer, you started talking about all these chemicals and these exposures. My mind went to what are we exposing our turnout gears to? Should we be deconning differently? This is coming off the topic of last week. What about those things? Or have you guys even thought about that, or what's the answer for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. UL is all over this. You can look up UL stuff and also the FSRI, Fire Safety Research Institute. They've done a ton of research into this stuff, and they're saying that our turnout gear does properly protect us. Now, not from the heat, because some of these can get up to like 2,000 degrees. But as far as the exposure side of it, as long as you're on air pack, on air, wearing your turnout gear, you're not necessarily being exposed to anything different than we're not used to. It's just the volume of it is a lot higher. So as long as you're deconning and washing the gear after these, then you should be as safe as we normally are. Does that answer your question?
That's good verbiage.
Yeah.
As safe as we normally are.
I was going to say, I think I think it's a reality, right? So when you start hearing those chemicals and things like that, I wanted to make sure people understood that it's I want to say a normal risk, but right, it is the risk that we're into, right? And so we need to be thinking about decon and the exposure risk just as equally on this one as we are the regular house fire, right? And I think that's kind of where I wanted to segue with it, if not a little bit higher on those, because we're a little more lax to them. You kind of mentioned the other question that I wanted to have was you kind of mentioned about the runaway and the vehicles. Do you envision, again, I'm putting my fire marshal hat back on, do you envision manufacturers, or could you see where maybe a self or an extinguishing system, some kind of foam cell inside, right? Can't puncture it. By nature, we're fixers. So do you think that could be beneficial based off of what you've been told? I know the cost of that would be astronomical, right? But could something like that be beneficial, at least to get it in the incipient phase?
So I'm maybe, but like I said, that the biggest thing that they found so far that works on these is water. There's some other chemicals that are being sold out there, is that they'll stop that chemical chain reaction, and we might come up with something that does. The one thing I do know that there was at least one of the vehicle manufacturers come up with is an actual port that be like on the B or C post, a piece of plastic that firemen can break off, and then you can dump your water into that port to be able to flood the battery cell out. So there's already some manufacturers that are going that route.
I was going to say, where you would normally see your gas tank, maybe you would see a quick connect, right? And you would be able to hook up to that, and it would just flood it, and you'd be able to keep it there.
Yes.
It'd be like fuel in a NASCAR.
Sure.
They do. Yeah.
Yeah,
Raise
sure.
hell.
Yeah. we have an example too. We just got a new trash service in the city I work for, and part of the contract was that they needed to bring all brand new trucks to our city in order to take over for waste management. And part of that, they said, not only will we bring new trucks, but all of our new trucks are equipped with a 2.5-inch intake, and which leads through, so you can flood it. And it has 3 on the top. We've seen it, 3 2.5-inch open butt discharges, and it just floods it out. And what makes it even more relevant to this conversation was we just ran one 2 weeks ago. Our engine 3 gets on scene and do a little size up. They use the intake, they attach to it. I mean, this puts, I don't even know, it puts a shit ton of water. I don't know what GPM it is, but it's a lot. And they ran this thing for 10 minutes. They turn it off, still keeps smoking. So they made it a little bit bigger, got a battalion chief up there, ordered 2 extra engines. One of us was just for decon because we were figuring it was a lithium ion battery. Sure enough, we found a safe place. We, evacuated everybody out of the park, dumped the stuff in the parking lot, and they found a little kid's bike that had a lithium ion battery attached to it. And so, it took us not too much time once we figured out the problem, but, it was unbelievable. But so there are, there's forward thinking. Obviously the trash truck, you guys have all been on trash truck fires where somebody puts something in there and it ignites it. But anyway, it's that makes it an interesting topic. Like if they did that on EVs, that might be worth it. So.
But that's a great segue. Y'all have probably paid attention to all the big problems that the guys up in New York have had with all of these, I forget the term that they're used for them, but all of the e-bikes and they call them micro mobility devices. I mean, dozens of people have been killed in New York City because of these e-bikes and scooters and all of that stuff. That I went to a symposium in New York. It was a lithium ion battery symposium in New York that I was able to go up to, a 2-day symposium. And they listed now that, and it might have changed, it's been a couple of years ago, that lithium ion batteries that were the 3rd leading cause of building fires in New York City. Cooking, smoking, batteries. That's how big this problem is. That's why I said we don't have an EV problem in this country, in the fire service. We have a battery problem.
Well, and it's funny you say that because kind of going back to the conversation that was had last week it's not just there's 5, I don't remember all the 5 that we wrote down, right? But it's the production, it's the installation, that's man-made. Like at the end of the day, someone's got to put it together, or at least make sure that the machine that put it together is right? And there's a certain amount of quality control issues. There's the use, there's the disposal / recycling. Right? Like, so then what about when it's done, right? Where are all these batteries going to go, and what kind of facilities are we going to have them at after they've been there or after they've been in a wreck? So some of our most dangerous areas is not just the car sitting on the street, but go back to the comment that you made at the Wawa when you got 5 of them sitting there. What happens whenever we have this at a recycling center and we have pallets of these and one lights off, and now, it's just, hey, we're waiting for these things to get picked back up. What do we do then, right? And I don't know that that's a question for you to answer, but it's just situationally aware. Do we have these kind of facilities in our first due? And if so, what's our plan for them, right? Because that's a lot of water at these types of facilities. I want to
piggyback into that. Go ahead.
Similar to what, or on the vein of what Brian's talking about, will a dead battery do that? Is it the materials that will start the fire, or is it the energy? Because if they're de-energized, will they still burn? I was kind of just want to tie that in with Brian's.
Yes, the risk factor is associated with the charge level of the battery. Think about a gas tank. Whether it's full or empty will dictate to how much it burns.
Yeah. So theoretically, to tie into Brian's question, if these batteries are decharged and out of service, they shouldn't have the same inherent risk, right?
It's much lower, but it's still a lot of chemicals and all of that stuff in it. It's much lower, but your phone, when it turns off, it says dead battery and it turns off. Most of them are still holding 10 to 15% of charge in that battery. So very few of them are ever dead to where they're not holding any energy at all. So any one of these batteries does have a risk factor. It's just going to be much, much lower. Like that bus fire, that thing was probably fully charged, and that's as big a battery cell as you're going to find on a vehicle, other than some of these over-the-road big trucks that they're putting out there, where these battery cells on them are enormous. But going back onto your segue, where you talked about pallets of these things, if you have a shipping area in your district, then they're coming through it. If you have trains, if you have over-the-road trucks coming through it, they're coming through your district. In Norfolk, Virginia, about a year and a half ago, they had a tractor trailer full of these old batteries, of EV batteries, that they were taking to put on a cargo ship to send to another country. And they caught fire in the back of this tractor trailer, and they spent the next 12 hours there dumping water on this tractor trailer to try to put them out. Literally, a campaign event. If you go on one of these, you better call somebody to bring you a pizza, because you're going to be there a while.
And Chief, I mean, we're talking about, okay, like, we're all not environmentalists here, right? But the fire from a lithium ion battery creates crazy amount of gases, the ones that you've already, acknowledged. Those are going up into the atmosphere, right? But when we were talking on this trash truck fire, my chief goes, "Hey, you're a decon." Okay, copy that. So we set up a line for like emergency gross decon, whatever. But he said also, we need to make sure that water is not running off into the storm drains. And I'm like, holy shit, right? So now you're sitting here talking about pallets of lithium ion batteries on fire, tens of thousands of gallons, possibly 25,000 gallons per vehicle. I mean, you're talking pallets. We're talking a lot of water, and that is a lot of waste runoff. So, like, where does that go? Are we gonna have to like contract?
How do you even control that, right?
How do you right? And we have to be very literal on this podcast now, right? And what we suggest and what we don't. And so, like, we're coming up with a conversation of like, what do we do with all this water? And it's sometimes, hey, we're firemen. We're there to put the fire or the fire out. Sorry, and that's it, right? But we're also conscious about other parts of the environment, especially where I work. Oh my God, water control. We have coastal commission. I mean, there's a lot that's involved with keeping the crap that we do out of the water in the ocean. And so, again, we're not suggesting anybody do anything with protocols or whatever. This is just conversation about, some nasty stuff that can possibly get put into our environment, so.
A local fire department, they have a junkyard that's has several like Teslas when the first generation came out, and they're all sitting there rotting in this junkyard. And for a month, they had several of those cars just light off. And after the first event, they can start working with the junkyard, and they dig a hole, pick it up, throw it in the hole, and the fire department fills it up with water and just stay on top of it. And I've seen in Europe, of course, they have extra special types of vehicles. They'll bring a giant dumpster, rollback, on their fire truck, pick it up, drop it in, fill it up, sit and wait.
Now, the problem with that is that'll work to put them out. And I've had guys ask, why don't we do that around here? Is what are you going to do with that water? EPA regulations, that water has to be, you can't just take it to the water treatment plant and dump it in. Somebody's going to have to pay for what you're going to do with that water.
I was going to say, wouldn't that not be the responsibility of the tow company or whatever salvage company or cleanup company? Call the insurance company, right? Like, that's you insured the vehicle. Yeah. You figure it out, right?
Yeah. And it's going to depend on what their insurance. We're going down a whole rabbit trail there. That you see why it's a problem. You absolutely.
Every action, there's a reaction, right?
But this
we know that as
it just goes back into what I said. It's about the best thing that can happen with these, if we can let it burn, for that to happen. Right. So back to our quick action guide. We've written in there that we want. First of all, we got an upgraded to run an assignment. If just a single engine company responds on this one, you're outgunned. You are completely outgunned. So we increased the run assignment to a couple of engines, a ladder truck, safety officer, BC, and if it's on limited access highways or whatever else, we put a tanker assignment on along with it. But so we want them to initiate fire attack, upgrade the assignment if it hadn't already been done. We trained our dispatchers to start asking questions of the drivers of what's it fueled by. Is it gas, diesel, or electric? So our guys will know and they've done a great job of asking those questions. So
They
but
actually dispatched one yesterday, Rick.
okay, cool. So there's we want them to get on scene, call for help, no different than you're all trained to be able to do. We identify that it's an EV, initiate fire tech, and search the vehicle. All right. If it's obvious it's not going out quickly and we've cleared the vehicle, now they got an opportunity to make a decision that's laid out in that quick action guide. All right. Is there any hazards associated with letting this burn? Is it close to other vehicles? Is it close to an occupied dwelling? Is it underneath power lines? All the exposure risks that y'all are used to identifying. If it's not anywhere near any of those things, then is it a good idea to just let this thing burn? Now, you're going to shut the roadway down and you're going to have YouTube videos of firemen sitting on the side of the road, watching a vehicle burn, and everybody's going to be coming by with their camera going, look at these firemen. They ain't doing crap but letting that car burn. That's what we should be doing. And look, that's a paradigm shift for the fire service. That's not what we do. That's not what's expected of us. So when we first pitched this idea, we had to go up to the fire chief and go, are you good with this? And are we prepared for, to tell the county administrator that if a YouTube video comes out, they were doing what we want them to do? Because on the environmental side of it, if we dump that water, like we have a couple main reservoirs in the county that provide drinking water. If you're on Genito Road going across our big reservoir and there's one of these EV vehicle fires from a crash and we dump 20,000 gallons of water and all those heavy metals and all that stuff into the drinking water, man, we're in a bad way now. So it's the better decision is to be able to let it burn if you can't put it out very quickly. So yeah, it's an issue.
I mean, it's CRR. It's community risk reduction. It's also community education. It's also community education. It's doing PSAs through social media and people that follow you, putting out mailers. That the fire department is worried about these EVs, although that's not going to deter people from getting them. Mm-hmm. But imagine that forward thinking. Changing with the times. Interesting concept.
What a concept.
I know, right? Crazy.
Yeah. But I've had I was also recruited to come help. Actually, the state of Virginia and state legislature, they passed a bill, bipartisan, amazingly enough, that to mandate every firefighter in the state of Virginia receive electric vehicle awareness training. So I was part of a group that was pulled in to develop that for the Virginia Department of Fire programs. And I was actually did a podcast with them, and I told them this is a really interesting part, that when I took that trip to New York, there was a female scientist from UL that was there. And you could tell she didn't speak much, but what she did, people shut up and listened. So you start going, okay, I need to talk to her. So when it was lunchtime, I went and sat with her and said, can I pick your brain? And she was very polite and said, yeah, please do. I said, we're not, they're in our county, but we're not seeing these problems. Like, we've had a few here and there, but like, we're not seeing the stuff like you're seeing coming out of California and Europe and stuff like that. And she asked me a question. She goes, when was the last time you ran a vehicle fire that was less than 10 years old? And I went, maybe once or twice in my career, not very often. She said the majority of the electric vehicles on the roadway right now are less than 10 years old. You let them get more age on them, more miles on them, more wear and tear, and the stuff's going to start breaking down. And not only that, but here for too long, you're going to be able to order a replacement battery pack from an overseas company in your JEGS magazine and slap it in your Nissan Leaf in your garage. And now it's non-manufactured recommended batteries. They don't have the same chemistry. They don't have the same UL testing and so forth. That's when you're going to really see those problems really, really beginning. So if you wait till the problem comes to develop the solution for it, then you find yourself in a jam, and the firemen are to be the ones that are going to pay for it because they're not
like
prepared
buying
for
a bootleg iPhone charger.
Exactly.
Well, or laptop battery, right? Like if we're talking about lithium-ion batteries, right? A lot of people will replace it. And I had a fire at a storage unit fire, and 100 units, and there was a laptop battery that they suspected. I'm going into all the details of it, but it was crazy. And the amount of exposure that we had to the firefighters, close to, it's think about it. It's compartmentalization. 100 units we're trying to do salvage and overhaul. We're in there trying to put the fire out, and it's unreal the amount. And when it all came down to was a laptop battery from Amazon, right? Mm-hmm. Overcharged.
It probably
runaway,
came from Indonesia or something, and there's no
somewhere
quality assurance.
Somewhere China.
And so all of those people got paid pennies on the dollar for their homeowners insurance, right? They didn't even know it. Everybody who had insurance, those who had it in there. And I mean, there was,
if not, everything they had in there was just gone.
Right. That's what I'm saying. It was just gone, all because of something. And so that's not even exposure to life. That's just property. And it's unreal to sit there and think that that's all where that came from, was just the battery.
And that's the big part. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to circle back to the FDNY story, right? And we talk about density, probability, risk. And that's what we need to have, is those, facts to re-engineer, kind of like what Matt said about the CRR, right? It's those things is what starts the conversation to push the manufacturers, right? To re-engineer and rechange things. And also, I mean, let's be honest, what's going to push a lot of this is your insurance companies who go back and say, hey, our profit margins are down because we're paying out for claims because of the exposure that you have. And I think that that's where we're going to see a lot of that happen. And unfortunately, that's the way the world turns around, right? Like, money is what's talking. And that's what we're going to see. So I'm curious to know, that was kind of the attempt to segue into, do we have, I don't want to say a dollar loss, right? Because that storage unit fire was hundreds of thousands of dollars. But on these EV fires, we're talking about it contained to one vehicle, right? It's a total loss. But when you start looking at these in a vehicle that's in a garage, there's exposure. We're talking about higher dense houses. But in FDNY, these e-bikes, same thing, right? Like, I mean, what's our average dollar loss in a place like that? I mean, it's got to be huge.
Yeah, it's absolutely got to be huge. And you talked about your replacement, laptop battery. That's the biggest bulk of the problem that those guys are describing in New York is, I mean, like say that you had Unkie's, bike shop in whatever town he's in, and you rented out 20 or 30 or 40 of these e-bikes. And then when they get 5, 7, 8 years old, are you going to get the manufacturer replacement battery at $1,500, or are you going to order the one off of Amazon for $500 and replace it yourself?
I just want to note that Unkie's never done cardio in his life.
But my point is, they're replacing with these cheap batteries that they're not UL tested, and they're failing, and they got like rows of like 20 of them charging at a time. So the fuel, they're fully charged, and when one of them lights off, they all light off, and it burns down buildings and kills people.
Unreal. That's early recognition right there. I mean,
watching how fast that bus, how hot it got so fast. It went from 0 to 100, in 2-3 seconds. Like it went. It's
you imagine getting a fire like that at one of those.
You have no incipient stage. It goes from ignition to full growth immediately.
Yeah, she gone.
100%.
And one bus turns into 10 in 2 seconds. It's crazy.
Look, if you get bored one night at work or whatever, like once you get back off at 2 a.m. call, just do a YouTube search for electric vehicle fires, and you'll find stuff out of China where they burned up like 30 in a row, and you'll find stuff over in LA where they've had a Tesla into a house and it burned the whole house down, and it took the crews 7 hours to put it out and sent 6 firemen to the hospital for hydrogen fluoride and hydrogen cyanide and blah blah, all these other exposures and so forth. It'll really, I went down a number of rabbit holes when I first started on this trail, to the point where I'm
we just recently toured the that new construction at Chippenham and Midlothian where they put that parking deck, and they've got 2 or 3 or 4 EV chargers on each floor. And my first question was like, are these on every floor? How close are they to the hydrant? Because this is going to be a problem at some point.
And that's why
this could be ugly.
That's why we just invested into, we just got in the county our first EV fire blanket. So now people that are thinking about going that route, we literally just got it. We got Jack Reeks and Jacob Newton are going to be training all the truck guys on how to be able to deploy them. But some people think we can buy this fire blanket and go, all right, that'll put them out. No, it just encapsulates it. It doesn't smother it. It's going to sit there and burn, but it's containing the heat. It's containing all those terrible gases that could kill people, and it allows you time to come up with a game plan. Is what it does.
The surrounding property out of the way.
That's it. It's a stopgap. It's not a solution.
Gotcha.
It gives you time to be able to figure out what you want to do with it.
Wow. All right, let's spin that into, since you just talked about truck stuff, let's go to the extrication stuff, because that's always been the thing. Like, even when the hybrids were coming out, and now they're full EV. I mean, I know they have some tags in them, and I know the wires are different colors and that kind of thing. But let's talk about the extrication side and how to kind of pre-plan for that, and what do we do for those instances.
All right. The biggest thing, first of all, that I like to preach when I get on the pulpit is early recognition. It's not like these things are riding down the road with a flashing sign on it that says "I have a battery." The cars, a lot of them look very similar, and the SAE requirements are that it has to have very small badging. It doesn't have to be like, "Hey, look at me." So you need to look. Does it have a tailpipe? If it doesn't, you need to be suspicious. It's that simple. But
Yeah.
I, even as much as I've been into it, I found myself walking around when I get dispatched to a cut job with one of our truck crews, of walking around and doing my normal assessment, watching the cut on it, and going, I didn't even look to see. And I'm the one that's responsible for it in our county with the training with it. So you've got to be diligent to look to see what vehicle is involved. And if it's a hybrid, some of those same hazards are there. It doesn't have to be a full EV. A hybrid can kill you. It's still carrying that high juice. So early recognition. And then once you recognize what it is, I would highly encourage you to download one of a few different apps to your phone that'll allow you to pull up the manufacturer's quick. I forget. I don't think they call it a quick action guide, but anyways, they got a couple page guide for most manufacturers on most of these models, where it'll pull up. It'll show you a schematic of where the battery and where all the high voltage lines are, and it should show you how to deactivate the high voltage battery, the big battery, and then also the 12-volt battery. If you only get one, you're not taking care of all of your hazards. When you disconnect the high voltage battery, that's all the big juice coming out of that battery pack. It's supposed to de-energize the lines. That battery still holds all that power. If you lift, crush, or cut on that, it's going to be a bad day. Now, the 12-volt battery also opens up a circuit, which also de-energizes, and it also turns off de-energizes your airbags and all of the other supplemental restraint systems. Those things should happen before we cut on the car. Otherwise, you are putting the fireman at risk. And then the whole peel and peek, it is vital. You need to peel and peek on this vehicle so you can look behind that sheet metal to see where those components are, because you're trusting this thing to de-energize. I don't really want to trust it so much, but I want to make it as safe as I can. All this takes time. And if you wait till you run this thing to download that app to start looking for that information, you're behind the 8-ball. You're already screwed. And that person in that car is the one that's going to pay for it, the one that you're supposed to be going to help.
Mm-hmm.
So once you de-energize it and you look at the schematics, it's not much different than a standard vehicle extrication, with the exception of that it has the high strength steel. Most of the beams are the high strength steel. So if you got old generation extrication equipment, it's not going to cut it. It's literally not going to cut it. You're going to break the blades on it. And it has to have that high strength steel because it's designed, it has to hold like 2 times the vehicle weight for the rollover, because the battery packs are so heavy that they had to engineer it to be stronger. So all of those A, B, and C posts are high strength steel that you got to have the right equipment to be able to cut and pry on them. Otherwise, you're going to be there a long time. Now, once you start talking about vehicles on their sides, how do you prop this thing up? When you flip that thing over, it's solid along the bottom. You don't have your normal holes to be able to put like your interstate pack of your stabilization stuff on. And if you just start jamming one of your stabilization poles up in there and puncture that battery pack or damage it, you might have turned what was a vehicle extrication into a vehicle fire. And we saw what just happened. What's the worst case scenario? So now, we've been kind of lazy over the years with our department. A number of times I'll get there. We have a rule that we're supposed to put a hand line on the ground for vehicle extrications, but sometimes we get lazy with it. I've tried to preach to people and show them videos like this to go, if you wait for that thing to light off to start bringing that charged hose line, you're going to burn up firemen and the people that are trapped in that car. So that charged hose line on the ground is vital.
It'll be fully involved before you get back to the unit to pull it.
Yep.
Right.
Based off that video I just saw. Yeah.
We all pull a line on those. We know that. Come on now, Chief. Yeah, right. One thing I was going to mention, and I've been able to mention a few times, but just kind of let the conversation roll, is our department reached out to Tesla specifically, and they came down with every model of theirs, which was only 3 at the time: the C, the 3, and the X. Now they have the Y. They came down with the 3, and they showed us, they basically where to cut and the markings. They were really great. And they gave us some diagrams of the vehicles. In fact, Rivian also, the owner of Rivian actually lives in the town I work in, and they've been awesome. The whole company, they brought some down. Rivian actually is supplying vans for like Amazon. So a lot of the Amazon. What were you going to say, Doug?
No, we have a ton of them in the county right now. I think I saw 6 or 7 my last shift day 2 days ago. They're everywhere.
Walmart's using them as well.
Yeah,
exactly. I would reach out to Rivian.
I didn't know they were Rivian, but I know they're electric.
They might, because they let us cut on a few of them, and they brought down a Rivian SUV, and we were able to cut on them. They took all the energy components out, but they said, "Hey, this is where it is." Unfortunately, I didn't make the training, so I can't give you any insight on what happened. But from the guys, that were there, there was 2 or 3 or 4 days that they did of cutting on these. To be able to cut that big van, it was almost like a Sprinter van. Those, their Mercedes Sprinter van looking things. Was pretty intense on what it looked like afterwards. Didn't look easy. Let's just say that.
Your guys got really, really lucky that they allowed them to do that. That's not common. That cost them a bunch of money to allow them to do that.
Right. So, but even if they come down and they give you a class on because when Tesla came by, they showed us what the battery looks like, and what you're talking about, Chief, was like those little AA batteries. They're like the size of a shotgun shell. Like a 12 gauge shotgun shell. And like you said, there's like 1,000, however many of them, thousands of them.
Yep.
Right. But they're just each individual, and they just go psh, 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 one to another. And they actually, let us pass it around, touch it, feel it, whatever it is. But, and just that way you get like a sense of what you're dealing with a little bit, a little bit of a visual helps. So anyway, so anybody that's listening out there, right? That's what we're here for, is just to create the conversation. It's like, hey, what are they going to say? No, call Chevy, whoever, the Volt or whatever.
We've got an Amazon place in the county.
They might bring one down and they might say, hey, take a look at it. They might have experts. Who knows, right? I'm sure that if an Amazon truck catches fire, then they have to call somebody. They call their supervisor, and the supervisor got to call somebody that has some sort of subject matter expertise on that. So
we had a different experience. We reached out to the Tesla dealer, which is in a different jurisdiction, but it's in the Richmond area. And we reached out to them to try to get them to engage and help us. Crickets. We got nothing back out of them. So your folks were lucky that they got that.
Yeah, maybe someone's listening to the podcast now that has some connections to, an EV. Maybe it's not Tesla, maybe it's not Rivian. There's other electric vehicle companies out there now that has, something that where they would, be willing to do that. Rivian, when they came in, we did a lot of filming and stuff like that and gave them the rights to the video. So they're able to use it for advertising and all that kind of stuff. Look, we're helping the fire departments. We're working together for community education and public service and all that kind of stuff, which was really cool to put that out. So,
and if any guys listening are responsible for vehicle extrication, there are some really good YouTube videos out there that actually show them tearing apart the vehicle to know what the components look like, in the DC to DC converter, which can kill you, and these cables, which can kill you. And there's a lot of really good stuff out there because obviously every one of us is not going to get one of these to cut up. I even found a couple wrecked ones that have been wrecked in the county, and I went to the salvage yard to go, hey man, help us out, help a brother out. Can we get that? And he's like, I'm sorry, even tore up like this, it's worth $40,000 in salvage parts. Or whatever, it might not have been 40, but it was a ton of money by the parts that they can take off of it to be able to then sell to other people that have damaged their vehicle. He's like, sorry, bro, can't help you. This is too valuable. It's not like when somebody wrecks a Mustang and it just gets written off.
Right. Wow. And Unkie, anything on the DoD side that you guys have done with EV stuff, or is it just kind of
nothing fancy? I did hear on the news that a lot of armored vehicles are being purchased. They're going to be EVs, supposedly. So
gotcha.
We'll see how that goes, but we do deal with a lot of the batteries with the DoD toys, with EODs and their little robots and drones and stuff like that. We had maybe now 2 years ago a summer of battery fires, but luckily they're all in Conex boxes outside of the rare buildings, the squadrons buildings. So they'll take the batteries out and put it in a Conex box.
Good.
They'll come in the next morning, go play with their toys. They open it up, a little bit of smoke comes out. Battery's burned up. Nobody knows it until they open up the container. So it's pretty good about that. The DED is all about getting them outside, having their own little space. So when they do catch fire, the impact is very small to the mission.
I thought I was going to get some action earlier, or this was Thursday. We got dispatched to the Genesis dealer, which is like Lexus of Hyundai, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
For a vehicle fire. And it was in the garage. Mm-hmm. So we're on the way there. I'm driving a ladder truck, and I'm thinking, all right, I'm going to throw the tail around. I'm going to put it down for a curbside because we're going to, whatever. Well, thankfully, this guy put it out with a fire extinguisher, and it was like a freaking 94 Honda Civic. I don't know why it was in the shop, but thank God that's what it was, because that could have been ugly. You know what I mean? Like it was inside the garage at this place, and there was 10 or 12 cars in there. But yeah, thank God it was a Honda Civic that he got out with an extinguisher. But yeah, it could have been ugly.
I was dispatched to that. I was reading those comments to see if the dispatcher picked up on what type of vehicle it was, because it was going to be a very different situation.
It was way out of place in that place, but I'll tell you, hey, thank God. They may not even tell the guy who owns it. They'll just fix it and call it good.
Wow.
So, but these batteries are all over the place. I'm gonna bounce away from just EVs. Like, if you have any technology parts or areas that are really growing, it's funny. When I was about 6 months into learning about EVs, our chief that's involved with the community risk reduction, he calls me one day and goes, Rick, do you know what a BESS is? I'm like, how do you spell that? He's like, BESS, a battery energy storage systems. I'm like, no, why? He goes, well, we got one coming to the county. They're going to start building it in Midlothian in a couple months. I need you to research it. I'm like, okay. So I did a quick internet search that night at work, and the first thing that pops up is in Surprise, Arizona, one of these battery energy storage system facilities the size of a Connex box, had a fire inside of it, and they had a suppression system that put the fire out, but it was still off-gassing, and it was just waiting for air to... Anyways, so when the first fire crew got there and they opened that thing up, it blew 4 firemen through a chain link fence and ended their careers. That's the very first thing I find. I'm like, awesome. That's coming right here. Awesome. Actually, the biggest one in the state. 20 of these in that one facility is coming in the state. And now,
which in the Midlothian?
It's in Fives District up on Dry Bridge Road. Yeah. And then has anybody got
like you wouldn't go, Doug, if it caught fire, like you wouldn't go.
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
And does anybody have data centers in their first dues?
Yeah, we do. Yeah,
okay.
We have Verizon data centers.
I never thought about that. I remember that 1 and 2s there that we always talked about. If it ever catches on fire, just get the hell out of the way.
Yeah, well, there's a humongous one that they just built out in 18 Spurs Stew, out in the east end of the county industrial park. It's literally like 250,000 square feet, and it runs nothing but servers, and they're all backed up by batteries. Now, they use so much energy that this place has 14 Caterpillar diesel generators to run the place if the power goes out. That's how much power that these facilities use. There's like 500 data centers in Loudon, Virginia, and the power companies told them up there, you cannot build anymore. We cannot provide you the power to build anymore. So they're all migrating south. And Rico's got some. We had our first one, and actually about a month and a half ago, we actually had a battery bank inside of one of those meltdown, and the suppression system came on, and it was able to keep it in check. And they weren't lithium; they were nickel zinc. But they, our crew that went in with their 5-gas monitors, it pegged out high on it for CO. It pegged out the H2S sensor, the HDN. All of that stuff was pegged off the charts from just. It was think about your fire station locker that was full of about 6 of these batteries that melted down. The fire was out. The fire was completely out, and it took them 7 hours to be able to ventilate that place enough so that they could get inside of it. We had a crew there for 7 hours ventilating this because it off-gassed into these batteries.
So, Rick, let me ask a question. What type of suppression systems are you seeing in those server rooms? I got to put my fire marshal. Nerd alert for Doug. Nerd alert. But for me, I was seeing them as FM200 systems. So these clean agent systems. What are you seeing in those for one of that size?
Okay, I do not want one with a clean agent. I absolutely don't want it. If I have a choice, and I don't really have a choice with it, but a clean agent. All right, let's think about what it's going to do. It's designed to dissipate oxygen and put the fire out, right? Okay, and we've already learned in the battery chemistries that they produce their own oxygen, they produce their own heat, they produce their own fuel. So that is not going to put it out. What it's going to do is it's going to put out enough until we come in and then drain a little bit more oxygen in it. And then it becomes a very volatile. That's exactly what happened in Surprise, Arizona. They put some sort of system in there that knocked the fire down, but it didn't take care of the problem, which was the overheated battery. So the data center facility, they actually had a pre-action system. So it took the smoke alarm going off and the heat to be able to activate the sprinkler heads. And they have high volume heads. I don't know the GPMs, but they had high enough volume heads to be able to handle the heat produced off of those batteries melting down.
I think
Nerd
they call
alert.
that their deluge.
Nerd alert. But no, that helps because so many people are like, oh, it's got to be an FM200 system. And I knew that wasn't going to be the case. I think his name is Michael O'Brien, a chief.
What's an FM200? What is that?
It's a clean agent. It's a type of suppression system. And usually it's done for the
I believe
servers.
it's an old wooden ship.
If it's just the servers, that's fine. The servers, that's
right,
fine.
Right. I was going to say, and that's the issue is that they were put in for servers for the data piece, but not the battery piece.
Well, that
And
makes
that's-
sense. If your servers catch on fire, you don't want to dump water on them because then it ruins every server in the whole room. As long as the
Right.
battery rooms are separate and they have a separate type of suppression system, then you should be in good shape. But the codes are way behind the technology.
Right. I wish I could remember his name, but he was talking about EV batteries and specifically what it takes for that. And I think he's a big push on the code side of it. Again, not to get into that, but by design. And the issue with that is when you run into it, you have existing facilities that was built under one code and then the current building with the new code. And the only way, just for everybody to understand this who may be listening, so you can understand for pre-incident planning purposes and response, is the only way to retroactively do that is usually the insurance company will make them come in because of the risk, right? So the fire code official, your fire marshal, you can't be in there like, hey, I need for you to make them do this. The fire marshal can't make them do anything. They're bound to whatever it was when it was built. But the insurance company can come in and regulate that. Yeah, his name is Michael O'Brien. He's the Brighton Area Fire Authority in Brighton, Michigan. So real quick, I just pulled that up. They want to go check him out. He does some other stuff as well as you, Chief. I don't know if you've got any other podcasts we can drop as well.
No, I don't in particular. But I think a lot of the fire marshal's offices also are outmanned, outgunned, and don't have the opportunity to get enough education about how advanced this technology is to even know what the appropriate level of suppression system is for it.
I would agree wholeheartedly.
Because it's changing every day.
Yeah. I think this has been a good show. A lot of good information.
It's been awesome. I mean, I think that if you were to pull anything from this, Chief, it's like early recognition. Recognize what you got. And if you're not there already, try to prepare to not be outgunned. Don't show up to a gunfight with a knife.
Airpack SCBA. Airpack
Absolutely.
SCBA. This is some bad stuff that will shorten your life.
Absolutely. And account for decon. We just were on with Tanya Herbert from Thin Red Line Decon in Florida. And she's talked a lot about, what we're dealing with the cancer and stuff like that. And so when you're getting on scene, do your best to do some gross decon and try to keep your guys safe. So awesome. Thank you so much, Chief. This has been an amazing hour. I've learned a lot. I hope that, I'm sure all of our listeners are thinking the same thing. They're just like, damn, if anything, it creates a conversation like we always want to do amongst these guys. And they go back to their departments and like, what do we do? It's all these like ideas have come up with this podcast. And I go to my chief and I'm like, hey, what do you think about this? He's like, oh, great. Go ahead and head it up. I'm like, God dang it.
That's right.
So you got to be careful of that. But man, I mean, they're all great topics and this being one of them. One thing we forgot to do at the beginning of the podcast, what we do with housekeeping is, we like to do a moment of silence. So just as, 5 firemen to the rest of the country, we lose brothers and sisters every day in this country. The ultimate sacrifice in the service. So we'd like to just give about 5-6 seconds.
We actually lost a volunteer in Northern Virginia yesterday,
Okay.
I believe it was, from
There we go.
gas explosion.
Yeah. So sometimes we have, specifics of, men or women that are close to us. But if anything, we give an umbrella moment of silence. So let's give a couple of seconds. All right. Well said.
Well said.
Well, Chief,
Go
that
Braves.
was awesome. Thank you so much. This has been a great podcast. And
And if you guys
good
want to
awareness.
learn more, go to Fire Safety Research Institute. Go to their website. They've got a ton of great stuff that you can learn from.
Fire Safety Research Institute.
Yep, FSRI.
I'll get the exact website, Matt, and we'll make sure
Get the
we it on
website.
the
We'll put
comments.
it on the show notes. If you're listening to this, it'll be in the show notes. Go ahead and click the link or put it into your.
We've been
your
trying to
web
get this one done for months now. I'm glad we finally got it done.
It's super awesome.
Thanks for
Super
the
great.
invite.
So, yeah, very good. Do you remember the three words at the very end?
Giggity.
Roll
all-
it, Gigi.
That's all I remember. I'm sorry. Roll it,
Perfect. Awesome.
One
Thanks.
job. He had one job.
Rick, you're amazing. That was really cool. We really appreciate you coming on, sir.
Thanks, Chief.
Later, guys.
Yeah, super
Don't-
fun.